welcome to Christ and Culture. This is Pastor Jeff Short, and today we're going to be talking about the chaos that is continuing in our culture and in our country today. We're still 3 weeks now past the elections of 2020, and we're still in a state of chaos as far as the status of the vote. We have numerous lawsuits that are being filed in 5 or 6 states right now. We have legislatures of these states meeting to decide what they're going to do with the vote count. And it's just a big mess. And the reason it's a big mess is because of, number one, there are numerous eyewitnesses testifying to the fact that they experienced up close voter fraud in their counting processing centers that they were part of. And so they are on record, signed affidavits, that these irregularities and cheating and illegalities were taking place. It's documented. They are on record, court affidavits, signed affidavits. They have already testified in front of hearings. And so these are serious allegations. So that's the first point. We have evidence. We have hardcore, upfront, concrete evidence that there was voter fraud in the 2020 election in November. That's one. The second thing is that the mainstream media outlets, NBC, ABC, CBS, CNN, public radio, public television, you name it, all of the mainstream outlets are denying that there is any voter fraud in the 2020 elections. They're denying that there's anything to look at. They're denying that there's anything to investigate. They're totally dismissing and discounting any of these eyewitnesses that said that they saw irregularities and problems in the processing and counting of the votes. They are totally, these reporters and the mainstream media outlets, they are totally dismissing, ignoring, and basically treating as nothing all of these charges. That's a second major source of chaos that we're facing. The third level of chaos that we're facing at this moment in our country is that the social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, you name it, and they are censoring information that runs contrary to the narrative that Joe Biden and liberal Democrats won. They're censoring it. They're taking posts down. They are banning people from Facebook. A state senator in Pennsylvania who was organizing a hearing for the President Trump's legal team and who wants to get to the bottom of these irregularities in the voting in Pennsylvania, his Facebook page was taken down and he is banned for 30 days on Facebook. Why is he banned 30 days on Facebook? Because he questions the validity of the elections of 2020. He questions the soundness and solidness of the process of voting in his state, Pennsylvania, because of all the testimonies of irregularities that occurred specifically in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania. So he was banned from Facebook, so he can't even post anything more. There have been others. One of the attorneys for President Trump, Sidney Powell, her Twitter account was taken down. There are links that just individual users provide are taken down. There is tech censorship like never before. We saw a little bit of this before the elections. We saw tech censorship. If you didn't give them exactly what they want to hear, and if you aren't talking about things the right way, they will take your Twitter account down. They will ban you from YouTube. We've had people in the past few months actually removed from YouTube, the whole channel, the whole broadcaster's channel removed, banned, banished, you might say. This tech censorship has gotten so bad that it is almost impossible to actually hear information as it's coming in real time. The Daily Wire recently did a survey, and they showed that of liberals, almost half of liberals did not hear about some of these important stories that were negative toward Joe Biden. And it says that 10% of them, if they had heard that, it might have changed their vote for Biden. So you have a number of factors coming into play why we're in a state of chaos today. On top of that, you have a lot of politicians who don't want there to be any investigation into these votes. They don't want there to be any problems because they want life to go on as it was before. They want things to be normal. They want things to be the way they were, and they don't want anyone questioning the narrative that there are elections done, the votes are in, votes have been cast, they've been counted, and a winner has been declared. And a lot of politicians seem to feel that that's good enough for them. So why go any further in looking for anything else? We've done the election, the ballots were counted, and a winner was called. And that's another thing. This year, more than any other time, networks and tech companies have decided who has won this race, and they have called the race for Joe Biden, which is not their official capacity. They can do that all they want. They can say that we project Joe Biden as the winner. We conclude that he probably won. But until he is actually sworn in as president of the United States in January, he is not the president. In fact, until the electors actually bring their votes to Washington, D.C. in December, he is not even technically, officially the president-elect. And yet, there has been a mad rush by mainstream media. There has been a mad rush by the big tech companies, by liberal Democrats, of course, by Joe Biden himself, to declare himself the next president of the United States, and actually go so far as to create and invent an office called the Office of the President-elect, and actually put up printing and banners in the background saying the official office of the President-elect, as if that is actually something, which it is not. It never has been something. That is not an official office, and that should not be stated as it is. It shouldn't be declared that it is. But again, we are living in a chaotic time at this moment in history. We're living in a time where we are having the mainstream media and the big tech corporations telling us that we have to accept their version of events. And if we don't, we're crazy. If we don't, we're hurting democracy, supposedly. It's really strange that as Christians, we are being told, because we want all of the legal votes to count, we want all of these fraudulent allegations and these irregularities to be explained and investigated, and we want to know whether, in fact, there is a winner in this 2020 election. We want to know that. We can't even ask for an investigation without being called some kind of conspiracy theory. It's that bad. So if you really want to get to the bottom of this, if you really want to know who won in the presidential elections, if you want to look into some of these serious allegations of voter fraud, you are called an enemy of democracy. You are called a conspiracy theorist. You're called a quack, a nut job. You're called everything that they can think of to try to discredit you simply because you want to know. You want to know. You don't simply buy into the mainstream media's narrative that Joe Biden is unquestionably the winner. And what's so strange is that you get a lot of Christians, evangelical leaders, church pastors, Christian organizations, seemingly willing to go along with the mainstream narrative just to get along with everyone. They want to be popular. They want to be friendly with the world. They want to be invited to the table. They wanted a seat at the table of whatever is out there in the future, whether it's Joe Biden or whoever. They want a seat at the table, and so they're willing to go along and pretend that we know for certain that Donald Trump, the president, has lost, and that Joe Biden, the former vice president, he is the winner. They want to pretend that. They want to go along with that, and they don't want to question that because it might hurt them later on in the future. And that is a real fear for a lot of people today. There are people on the liberal Democratic side of the aisle who are saying we need to make lists of all the people who supported Donald Trump. We need to make lists of all the people who question the integrity of the election. We need to make a list of all the people who oppose the liberal Democratic Party line and talking points, and then we need to punish them. That's what there are actual people in Congress, the House of Representatives, namely Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez from New York. She is actually calling for some kind of a tribunal that would punish people who don't buy into the mainstream media's narrative that Joe Biden is clearly the winner, or that people who supported Donald Trump, and these people should be punished. There are lawyers who at first were hired by President Trump and his legal team to work to try to sort out the election fraud allegations and election irregularities. Law firms were brought in, and they had to leave. Why? Because they were pressured by others in the law field that if they continued with the Trump team, they would be punished. They would be listed. They would suffer career setbacks. They would be blacklisted from the legal societies and the legal quarters and tables, at seat at the table in the legal discussions. They would be punished, in other words. And so we live in a strange time, a really chaotic time. There are people who are being threatened. There were people in Michigan, for example, that wanted to look more closely into what had happened in Detroit during the presidential election processing of the ballots. There are state legislators, and there are county canvassers, the board of canvassers. There were Republicans on that board that wanted to look further into irregularities, and they were actually threatened by people to drop any case against Wayne County, against any irregularities, to just totally drop it and not go any further with their questioning of the elections. There were people who actually threatened their children, that talked about where their children went to school, and talked about being punished, and talked about being called racist, and really put pressure on these state canvassers and county canvassers to the point where they caved in. And they gave in to the mob, evidently, or the threats of danger to their livelihood. And they went ahead and certified the Wayne County votes, probably out of safety concerns more than voter integrity concerns. And so you're getting pressure groups, you're getting pressured. It's a chaotic time. And as Christians, we want to sit back and we want to analyze this. We want to think our way through. We don't want to just blindly go forward like sheep following the worldly shepherds. We want to follow the good shepherd, Jesus Christ. We want to follow God Almighty because we care about truth. Truth is important. We don't just ignore truth because it's convenient to do so, or because it will help us in the long run materially or financially. We want to follow the truth wherever it leads. And as Christians, we have to be sober-minded. The Bible tells us in the New Testament to be sober-minded, to be Keep your head in all things, Paul tells us in the New Testament. We need to keep a clear head. We need to think harder and deeper than we have had to think in normal times, because we are facing chaotic times right now. This is one of the most confusing years in hundreds of years in this country. The year 2020 has been a very confusing year, hasn't it? The first sign of confusion came when we heard of this virus coming over from China and from Europe called the coronavirus. And we had to decide, okay, how serious is this? And at first, the experts were telling us you don't wear a mask. Then they flipped a few months later and said, oh yes, masks are very, 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 very important. Okay, so we're getting conflicting views from the experts. First off, we were told that there would be 2 million Americans that would die from this virus. Then we were told it's going to be a lot less than 2 million. So again, the experts confusing information and telling us contradictory things. So we've had to deal with the confusion over the coronavirus. We ran into rules that seemingly were arbitrary. For example, 6 feet distance rule. Keep your distance 6 feet. Why 6 feet? Why not 4.5? Why not 8? Why not 10? Why not 2? What is 6? Again, arbitrary rules. No explanations. No definitive information. It's very hard to know what exactly is going on with the coronavirus. For example, what is the actual death rate of this virus? Is it that they're counting people who died with the coronavirus but of other things? Or are they counting only people who die of the coronavirus as the main cause of death? Again, very unclear as to what the exact death rate of the coronavirus is. At first we were told that it affects the elderly and the very young, which is very common in these types of viral diseases. But then we learn later on that it doesn't affect the children nearly as much as adults and the elderly. So that children have virtually no possibility of dying from this virus. There are some children that have, unfortunately, died of this virus, but they're only a few and far between. So children are very, very safe with this virus, as are most adults, up until you get up into the 65, 70, and 80-year-old population, and then it becomes more dangerous. The highest risk group is, of course, the 75 and up group, and their death rates are still relatively low, but they are higher than the other population segments. But for most adults in this country, there is very little chance that even if they get the coronavirus, that they will actually die of the coronavirus. But that's not being told to us very clearly. Instead, what we're being told by the mainstream media is that every day the cases of coronavirus are mounting. Of course, they're not also telling us at the same time that states are testing more and more and more and more and more and more people at the same time. So the more testing you have of this virus, the more cases of this virus you will detect. That's only common sense. So if you don't test very much, you won't have very many case counts. If you test a whole lot, you will probably find a lot more coronavirus cases because you're actually testing more. Well, what that means is that a lot of people are getting this virus, but they're not dying from it because the deaths are not going up as high as the cases are going up. In fact, there are virtually no locations in the United States where the hospitals are overwhelmed, which is the basic concern of this virus. Flatten the curve. Why flatten the curve? Because you don't want the hospitals to be overwhelmed with patients all seeking treatment for the coronavirus. And if the hospitals aren't overwhelmed, then you can deal with this in a calm, stable, rational way. But that's not occurring now with the mainstream media. They are trying to get people to panic. I just read in the newspaper today that Los Angeles County has now issued a warning for all residents to stay in their homes. They're actually telling people stay at home order right now in Los Angeles. And here we're 8 months into 9 months from the beginning of this virus, and they're going back to the stay-at-home orders. This is totally a panic situation that the data, the statistics, do not conclude. For example, out in Los Angeles County, the Grace Community Church, pastored by Pastor John MacArthur, his church has been meeting for the last 2 or 3 months with no social distancing, no mask wearing, and the very same number of attendees every week, 10,000 or so in attendance at his church, packed together with no outbreak of coronavirus. I think maybe 2, 3, 4 people have even reported coronavirus in the congregation, and these were security guards. They weren't even people from the church. There might have been a few people from the church that actually got this, but for the most part, it's outside security guards that came down with mild cases but are better now. So where's the outbreak? Where's the epidemic? In fact, John MacArthur, the pastor of Grace Community Church, a few weeks back, asked a question from the pulpit, if this is a pandemic, this is the smallest and mildest pandemic ever in the history of the human race, because it only affects 0.01% of the whole population, and that everything that we read and hear on the newspaper, in the newspapers and on radio and television, on the internet, has been so overhyped that people are afraid to even go out of their home. And I see people panicked all the time. I see people driving down the street, see people walking down the street on the sidewalk with a mask on. I see people driving in their cars all alone with a mask on, as if they're going to spread it to themselves. I see people acting like this is the bubonic plague, the Black Death in Europe. It's not, and it has nothing to do with that, and the percentage of death is so different than that. It's so much different even than the Spanish flu of the last century. But yet again, the disinformation, the misinformation that we're getting from our networks and from our media outlets and from the Democrat liberal state governors and mayors, this has caused a lot of chaos in our culture. And then we had the riots that came through, the Black Lives Matter and Antifa riots, where these mainstream media reporters would stand in front of burning city blocks with a camera, seeing the flames and the fire in the background and saying, these are mostly peaceful protests, while city blocks are going up in flames. It's just absurd. And yet we're supposed to just accept all of that and go along with that as Christians and say, well, that's just the way it is. It must be so because the mainstream media says it's so. It must be so. The liberal Democrat mayors and governors are saying it's so. So we just have to go along with it. No, we don't have to go along with it. We are called by God to cling to the truth. We are called by God to look to God Almighty. We are called to put our faith in God. We are called to use our minds, our God-given rational ability. We are called by God to stand firm and to not fall for the lies of the devil. And people, we are being tempted to believe in flat-out lies like never, ever before. And so we just need to be warned over and over again. At this point in history, at this time, don't believe everything you hear. Don't believe everything you see on television. Don't believe everything you hear on the radio, because much of what you see in print, hear on the radio, and see on television is a lie. Much of it is. It's deliberate. It's calculated. It's part of a plan. We know ultimately the father of lies, Satan, uses his pawns and his minions here on earth to promote his lies and his false misinformation. And we need to do something we may have gotten out of the habit of doing, and that is thinking critically. We need to step back and stop thinking that everything everyone is saying must be true because, well, I tune on ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, MSNBC, PBS, NPR. I'm tuning in all these stations. They're telling me everything, and it's all the same message, so it must be true, right? Wrong, wrong. We are being told a party line here. We are being told a certain narrative, but we need to use our own minds, and we need to use a prayer and pray through everything. It says to not fear. Don't be anxious about anything, but with all things in prayer and supplication, make your request known by God. Pray about all things. We need to spend time in prayer like never before. We need to spend time in reflection like never before. Maybe you've never had to really think through a lot of things before because you could more or less depend on other people and their thinking and their processing and their pondering and their reflection to sort of be the guide for you. But that is not the case today. You have to find sources of information that are reliable and then go to those sources. And it's not easy today. To tell you the truth, with the mainstream media out of the picture as far as an accurate source of truth, with most of the newspapers, most of the radio broadcasts, most of television programming, most of internet sites totally distorting and misrepresenting information for political reasons and ideological reasons, it is difficult to actually just get information about anything controversial. So you have to hunt and you have to dig and you have to listen to voices that you trust. Do not trust people that you don't know and that you have not listened to very much to know that they know what they're talking about. Because there are so many experts today that will tell you what you need to believe, and yet they themselves will contradict themselves in about a week or two. We've seen that with the coronavirus. It happens again after the elections. So you have to stay alert, stay in prayer, and think your way through these terrible, troubling times. And that will get you through. Well, I hope that's been a helpful commentary, and we'll see you back next week on another edition of Christ and Culture. God bless.